Indian Writing in English, Module 1, Poetry. Indian Voices, an anthology of Indian writing in English. Today we'll be doing the poem Where the Mind is Without Fear, written by Rabindranath Tagore. But before we go into the poem, a few words about the poet. Rabindranath Tagore, the most outstanding name in Indian literature, had won a place for India in the world literary scene. A prominent name in Bengali literature, he was an accomplished singer and also a composer of beautiful poems and melodies. He has also written short stories, drama and novels. Many of his works, originally written in Bengali, have been translated into English. Now, if you trace the evolution of Tagore's literary career, we can see that his poetry can be divided into different phases. In fact, this division was made by Dr. B.C. Chakrabarty in his work Rabindranath Tagore, His Mind and Art. He divided Tagore's poetic career into the pre-Gitanjali period, the Gitanjali period and the post-Gitanjali period. During the first phase, or the pre-Gitanjali period, Tagore studies man in relation to nature. In the second phase, he studies man in relation to God. And the post-Gitanjali period, he studies man in relation to man. It was during the Gitanjali period that Tagore composed works like Gitanjali, Geeti Malya and Gitali. Gitanjali. Originally written in Bengali, Gitanjali means prayer offering of songs. The work represents a confluence of romanticism, mysticism and humanism. The original Bengali collection had 157 poems. It was published in the year 1910. The English Gitanjali, or song offerings as Tagore called them, is a collection of 103 English poems. Tagore himself translated them into English and they were first published in 1912. Of the 103 poems in the English volume, only 53 came from the original Bengali collection. The remaining poems were from his other works titled Naivedya and also from Keya and Shishu. Sometimes compared to the Book of Psalms, Gitanjali song offerings explore the personal relationship between the poet and divinity. He ponders over the relationship between humans and the divine. The divinity within inspired Tagore's poetry and motivated him to lead a pure life. But he also experienced the existence of a smoke screen that obscured the divinity within and without. Now, this aspect of Tagore's poetry is actually reminiscent of Wordsworth's philosophy as expressed in many of his poems, especially Ode on Intimations of Immortality. Wordsworth, he speaks about a child as the purest childhood as the purest state of man, where there is no veil to separate him from the divine. So a child is closest to God. Tagore was also concerned with the spiritual underlying the various physical manifestations of nature. Like Wordsworth, Tagore also honored the simplest and the most ordinary objects of nature and human life. He also believed in the presence of a divine spirit in the objects of nature, the pantheistic conception of nature where everything in the universe is touched by divine life. In 1913, Rabindranath Tagore received the Nobel Prize in Literature for Gitanjali and became the first Indian to receive the Nobel Prize. He was also the first modern Indian writer to be recognized internationally. In his introduction to the first version of Gitanjali, published in 1913, the Irish poet W.B. Yeats spoke highly about the religious nature of the work. As Yeats wrote, it was a tradition where poetry and religion are the same thing. Yeats was greatly impressed by the metaphysical spirit and mysticism he saw in Tagore's works. Tagore was also influenced by both the ancient tradition of Indian poetry and the modern Western tradition. And in Gitanjali, he wanted to introduce these two separate traditions and influences to one another and then combine the best of both. Features of Gitanjali. The collection traces the spiritual voyage of the poet towards the Supreme Being. The songs are characterized by a profoundness that is expressed with clarity, simplicity, optimism, and spiritual avowal. All the poems have great richness and variety. Humanization of divine is indeed a special quality of Tagore's Gitanjali. He employs domestic image and symbols. The mythopic elements offer an ethereal quality to his little songs that are also marked by faith and optimism. Talking about the criticisms raised against Gitanjali, it has been said that the poems contained in the collection do not present a logical structure. There is a succession of continuous themes. It has also been alleged that they lack the beauty and rhythm of the original Bengali work. The poet begins his poems expressing adoration towards God, but then there are also in individual poems dealing with themes as diverse as love, devotion, charity, and repentance. Some critics have brought the charge of repetition and monotony against him. Tagore deals with the same themes in many poems. The same image recurs in poem after poem. So there is this recurrence of the same theme and the same imagery. There is something vague in his poetry. Edward Thompson mentioned Tagore's mistakes with regard to articles, prepositions, the occasional misuse of an idiom, etc. But he never forgets to write. This is a beautiful tribute by Edward Thompson to Tagore. He writes English of extreme beauty and flexibility. It is one of the most surprising things in the world's literature that such a mastery over an alien tongue ever to any man. Tagore's pure, beautiful, and profound poetry reached such a sublime height that these trivial flaws can easily be overlooked. Where the Mind is Without Fear. Where the Mind is Without Fear by Rabindranath Tagore is probably one of his most widely read and discussed poems. It was originally composed in Bengali, probably in 1900 under the title Prarthana, meaning prayer. It appeared in the volume called Naivedya, which was which was published in 1901. Later in 1911, Tagore himself translated the Bengali poem into English, and that translation appeared as the 35th poem in his Nobel-winning anthology Gitanjali, or Song Offerings, published by the Indian Society, London in 1912. I shall attempt a line-by-line analysis of the poem Where the Mind is Without Fear. Where the mind is without fear, and the head is held high. The poem is in the form of a prayer. Tagore dreams of a free India where there is freedom of thought and people can hold their head high, which means that people can live with self-respect and dignity. Where knowledge is free, that is, there will not be any limitations to the frontiers of knowledge. Where the world has not been broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls. It will be a nation which has not been divided into fragments by the barriers of language, color, caste, or creed. Where words come out from the depth of truth. Words should emanate, should emerge from the heart. That is, they should be honest and truthful. Where tireless striving stretches its arms towards perfection. Everyone should strive hard, work hard, untiringly towards perfection. Where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way, it will be an ideal world. An ideal world where the clear stream of reason can flow freely into the desert sand, into the dry desert sand of superstitions and blind beliefs. The clear stream of reason has not lost its way into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever-widening thought and action. The perfect nation, where there is divine guidance, where there is God to hold your hand and help you explore the vast expanse of thought and action. Into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. And such a state of supreme bliss and spiritual freedom is equivalent to heaven. The poem thus ends with an invocation to the Divine Almighty to help His nation wake up into such a heaven of freedom. The poem Where the Mind is Without Fear is of special relevance in the current times. It is a prayer for people to live fearlessly. There should be equality as far as the opportunities regarding education are concerned. Equal opportunities without any form of discrimination. People should aim and constantly work towards attaining perfection. The darkness of ignorance and superstition can only be dispelled by the light of logical reasoning. Such a place would indeed be a heaven, and Tagore prays for the birth of such a nation. Thank you.